Let's start. Welcome to today's Coalesce Transformation Talk session. We're going to talk about leveraging the Coalesce API, which is basically another way of working with your Coalesce project. Before I start with that topic, let me quickly introduce myself. My name is Tim Kirschke. I'm a senior consultant at Scalefree. I have roughly 7 years of experience with working with data, many of those with Databot 2.0s. And since then I mainly work with various data warehouse automation tools, some of that, for example, Coalesce, but of course I'm also familiar with the other tools out there. In case you are joining the first time today, this Coalesce Transformation Talks session happens every third Thursday of the month. This is actually the last time that it's going to be a Zoom live webinar. From the next month on, we're going to switch to on-demand videos directly on YouTube. So check out our YouTube channel below if you haven't. But it's still the same way of submitting questions, and the goal is still to answer topics that are in interest for you. Okay, more details on that in the end. But let's talk about the Coalesce API. Of course, we're going to have a demo as well, which is, I think, always the most interesting part. But let's quickly, talk about what we can do with the API, how to access it, and some use cases that you could use the API for. So the very first things that you can do with the API, basically, as a maybe introduction, the API is in general split into two parts. So the one core API, let's call it the core API, is just called Coalesce API. And with this API, you can basically get all environment information. You can create nodes, get all the nodes that you have. You can also modify existing nodes if you want to. Then you can get an overview of the executions and the runs that you have in your environment, like what runs are active, all of them, or the details on a specific run. Also, the results of the run might be interesting for just knowing what's going on in your data warehouse. And that's basically what you can do with the Coalesce API. The second part of the API is the Run API, which, as the name suggests, gives you more options and more flexibility to do stuff with the objects that you have in Coalesce. So the very main component here is really to start, stop, and retry runs. So you can not just get information about the runs, but you can actively start and stop them. And you can also get the live status. So if you have a job running, you can just put a GET request with the job ID, and you actually get the status of the job as it is right now. Yeah, those are the features. I would say everything that you want to do or could do in the UI, most of it can be done via API as well, right? That doesn't mean that you should do everything via API, but you have the option to do all of that in the API. And how to do that? It's the classic way, basically. The one thing that Coalesce has is an interactive API Explorer, which is basically directly embedded into the API documentation page, which is very convenient to, I would say, try stuff out, but this is not what you would use for any production workflows, right? They do have a Postman collection, which is pretty nice, pretty convenient. So it's if you're familiar with Postman already, but you don't even need to be. Postman is a free service that offers you to just manage and build some API applications or just play around with it. But with the Postman collection, you have all endpoints available. You have parameters and variables pre-configured, which is pretty straightforward and very easy to start. You're going to see that one later. You can use Insomnia, which is just another API tool. In this case, there's not a pre-built collection, but maybe you used Insomnia before, then of course it's convenient. You can also use Insomnia to call the Coalesce API. You can use any command line that supports curl, and that makes it very flexible, but that's the same as for every API, right? That's not anything unique of the Coalesce API. But that just allows you, for example, to use tools like the Azure Data Factory or whatever other ETL tools you have out there to get data from A to B. With those tools, of course, you can also call the Coalesce API. And that makes it very powerful. And if you think about use cases where this Coalesce API might come in handy, you can I quickly thought about a lot of cool things. that really can help your project or just are nice to have, right? So if you think about like maybe getting started with Coalesce, you can create nodes via API basically based on what you already have. So if you have a data warehouse already existing, maybe you're switching from another tool to Coalesce, you can leverage the information that you already have to automatically create new nodes in with the API, right? That makes it very powerful, and in theory, you can do very fast and powerful migration scenarios. Maybe you want to implement a monitoring system that monitors your runs. Of course, Coalesce has integrated job monitoring, but maybe you have a dedicated, I don't know, AWS monitoring system and you want to integrate your Coalesce runs in there. It's a very easy way to just get the live status of your runs via API and embed it into any monitoring solution that you have. Maybe you have external schedulers like Airflow or whatever else, like maybe an integrated AWS function or service that just maybe at first gets the data out of the source system into Snowflake, and then Coalesce should be triggered to pick up the data. And then maybe you have another step inside Airflow that triggers Power BI to get the latest data, right? So you maybe want to embed the Coalesce execution into other steps. And with the API, again, this is pretty simple and straightforward. Maybe you want to sync between multiple tools in a way of having, for some reason, multiple automation tools. One of them might be the master system. Then you could, for example, get the node definitions out of Coalesce via API and use them to like mirror the transformation in another tool. I wouldn't really know why, but maybe you have like legacy tools that you have to use and you want to keep your tools in sync. That would be an option. And of course, many more. So with the API, you have unlimited options to use the data, and it really, like I would say, it breaks a bit the boundaries of having a tool, because you can get all information that you have inside the tool, you can easily get out of there, and that just makes it, yeah, a very sustainable choice, I would say, because you always know, hey, the data is not locked in, it's not vendor locked. I can basically feed into whatever else I want to use. But of course, if you use Coalesce, you typically don't want to switch back. Yeah, how do you start? I'm going to show to you in the demo session in a second. But if you want to get started, you have to have a couple of things. It's really not a lot. The first thing would be like the base URL of your Coalesce environment. In my case, it would be this one here. They have a table on their website. It basically depends on your geographical location, because based on that, you are forwarded to specific servers, and those servers influence the base URL. Then you need a bearer token, I never know how to pronounce it. That's just one that's basically the only connection to your project or to your account. And you can easily create that in Coalesce. There's a deploy tab I'm going to show you in a second. And there you just get a key or a token, and that you can use in your API authentication. You might use or might want to use an environment ID, but you don't really need that, because there's an option to just list all environments. And then, of course, you can get the environment ID of the specific environment that you want to use. But what you want to need, what you're going to need is the workspace ID, because you can't list all workspaces. If you think about Coalesce, you have one project. Inside the project, you have multiple workspaces, and each of those workspaces have an ID. And you get that under the build settings, which I'm going to show you in a second. And with those 4 things, 3 of them are mandatory, you're basically good to go to get started. And that's what we're going to do now. We're going to do a very short demo. I mean, it's not going to be too short, but I want to show you basically how to use the API. So the first thing I want to show you is the documentation of Coalesce that basically describes the API. And in here, you will find on the starting page, the link to the Postman collection, which makes it, as I said, very easy and a very fast way to just get started. And you can see here already, I'm going to use that one as well. But yeah, of course, you have a lot of tutorials here, how to get your token, how to make your first request. But this is also where your, they call it the API Explorer, is embedded, right? So I can directly send requests. I just have to basically put in my token here, and it does the job for me. It even generates some code if I want that. And that's a very easy, an even easier way to get started with the API. And that you have for all endpoints, right? And you see here as well the split between the Coalesce API and the Runs API. Okay, that's just one way. The other way, of course, is Postman, which I'm going to use in a second. I just want to quickly show you my Coalesce environment, which might look familiar. It's the same I used in the past sessions. And a couple of things to get for the API. So the first thing is the base URL. You just see it up here, right? That's not directly true, to be honest, because I don't need the EU. Okay, ignore what I said. You don't need this specific base URL. Just get it from the table. They have it here. Review the request URL. Yeah. So the base URL is what you need. Yeah, okay. So the next thing that you need, what I said, is the token. And you just get that by clicking on deploy. And you click on the generate access token button. It will immediately display the token. So I'm not going to do it now. And that token you just use inside your API connection. And then last but not least, if you go back to your build tab, I'm already in my workspace now. And if I now click on the build settings, and if I click on workspace, I see the ID of my workspace. And this 49 you're going to see later in a specific API call. Okay, but now let's, of course, use the API. So I jump into Postman. I forked the Postman collection that was mentioned before. It's embedded on the Coalesce documentation, right? I just forked it, and it's a very nice and easy way to just have a very organized way of dealing with the API. Because, for example, you just define here your URL and the token. It's not a security issue because it's just the first half of the token that you can see here, right? You can basically see all the endpoints here. They're also grouped, and you also have the run stuff here and the job endpoints. And we're just going to start directly with the first endpoint that I want to show you is the list environments endpoint. And for this, I basically don't need to specify anything. So all this stuff is already pre-filled. And the authorization is just forwarding my bearer token variable. And I can basically directly click on send. Hopefully it works. But you already see the result here. Yeah. See, one of my colleagues created a workspace. I created a workspace. No, environment, sorry, this is on environment level. And that's it. We totally have 2 environments right now. And you see, this is the one that I use in my Coalesce transformation talks. And this also has an ID. So I could theoretically get my environment ID now out of here and use it in further requests, right? That's what I meant before, that the environment ID you don't really need before starting with the API. But I could now use this ID to get more details on the specific environment by just calling the get environment endpoint. But more interesting, I personally think, is the node information. So what I want to show you here now is the next endpoint, which is the list workspace nodes endpoint. And this one comes with quite a lot of parameters. I mean, quite a lot. It's 4. And those are all having default values that you don't really need to configure. But the one thing that you have to put in here now is the workspace ID, because this endpoint lists all nodes per or for a specific workspace. And now you see the 49. This is the 49 that I got from my build settings here, right? And if I send this get request, I get a very long JSON response. 6,000 lines in my case. I have a total of 28 nodes, and I basically see all my nodes in here. So if we start from the top, I already collapsed a bit, but we see, for example, a orders node, which is the node type source, and I see everything in here. So I see all the columns, all the transformations, basically everything that I could see and edit in Coalesce is available out of the API, which is pretty nice. I could, for example, search for a specific hub. the hub orders. I see it here, and I can see the columns. I could see that this is the hash key. Yeah, everything. I can see everything here, which is pretty powerful. And yeah, this is of course all just introspective. So it's a nice way of seeing information that you could also access elsewhere, right? You could just get that information out of Coalesce. So the last thing that I want to show you now is my favorite. You can create a specific node, which is pretty powerful because imagine about all the things that you could do with this. You could actively feed into your Coalesce environment, automatically create nodes based on whatever you have, right? If I think about scale-free tools, we have TurboVault right now only feeding into dbt, but if we want to extend it to Coalesce as well, and then with this API, it's going to be very easy to directly create hubs, links, and satellites inside Coalesce. And this also, of course, has a bit of more complex call. So you have to actively define two things, and you can only define two things here. When creating a node, you just define what is the type of this node. I'm going to show you what this stands for in a second. And what or which nodes is this node depending on. I'm also going to show you where to get this. So the node type needs to be one of the node types that you have here in your Coalesce workspace available under node types. And I want to create a hub. So what I did is I clicked on the hub, and up here I see my node type ID. And this is what I pasted over here. And then this is what I want to do is I want to create a hub for a customer. So this customer hub node should be dependent on the stage for customer. And to get the node ID of this specific stage, what I did, I just checked my list workspace node response for SDG customer, and I see a couple of matches, 11. Let me check. This one is the actual node of my customer stage, and this has a specific ID, and this is the ID that I just pasted here. And if I now do a very powerful split view, like this and this, if I go into my Coalesce browser, you see the customer stage down here. There's already a hub. If I send this post, so this one is a post request, right? Everything else was get, because this wants to do stuff inside Coalesce. And if I just send this, what would I expect? I would expect another hub being created based on this stage, right? So I click send. I directly see this hub here. I get a response giving me a bit more information because I did not specify any name here, right? And this now returns the name, and it basically just puts in the Coalesce naming conventions. It puts in an integer, which is nice. I can work with that. And nothing else yet. But I mean, everything else that I have already, because this hub comes with a couple of default stuff, right? So it just forwards all the columns from the stage. That's just the way how Coalesce works by default. That's not related to the API. It creates, it does have the data vault options here. And this is all available here in my response. And I could now use this information because I now have a node ID, right? I could now call the setNode API, which is going to exceed my demo today. And I could basically modify everything that I want. Also the name, right? If I want to change the name, if I want to rename this to a hub customer, the original, I could do that with the setNode API. So this gives me basically the option to do very powerful things, creating nodes, modifying nodes. You can't delete nodes, but you typically don't want to via API. So that should be fine. But yeah, the goal here was to show you that all this stuff is possible and very easy. And you saw it here. That was what I really liked. I could directly send one here again, and it's going to create a third hub. And if I want one more, we see it directly here, which is pretty nice. But that should already be it. Of course, feel free to try out this API. You can do a lot of things, and I'm sure, some very powerful stuff to really get your Coalesce implementation on the next level. Yeah, so it's very easy. As I said, if you want to start, just try out the Postman collection or the API Explorer. You just need the token. Everything else should be very easy. And yeah, you can play around. Okay, then last but not least, thanks for joining. Join our next session. As I said before, it still happens every third Thursday of the month, but now we're going to release it directly on YouTube. So yeah, you don't expect another Zoom webinar for this specific format next month, but you can still submit your questions and topics here as you did before, and our YouTube videos will be, yeah, of course, based on that, and we'll be dealing with those questions. Okay, yeah, then just again, thanks for joining today. Please put your upcoming questions in the behind the QR code, and then hopefully see you in the next session again. Thanks for joining. Bye.